establishes, that brings into existence the Rupakaya. And I've looked at the scripture, I've not found really an explanation in the scriptures how this is done by Bodhicitta, how Bodhicitta establishes or brings forth the Rupakaya.
That's the means that by Jebachi should do some genius lana, Jebachi Pentadura.
So in order for this to become clear, in order to investigate this further, I will put forth a few of my own opinions with regards to this.
The share to Chesa Digidu, that Yawamachi, Lente, Ichile Changi, Shashin, Shenamato, Yashine, Yawamachi, Yudan, Lente, Yudan, Shevana, Daya, Dizita Yamara.
So here my explanation will be based on the law of cause and effect, in other words, the law of karma. But of course, if one doesn't have a belief in past and future life, well, we won't have the time to go into the explanation why there are past and future lives, why there's a law of karma and so forth. So this time we will not have. So it's kind of therefore based on assuming that one has already an understanding or belief in past and future lives and the law of karma.
미기와 주제에 되기 아니 든적이 루트에 이다기 루트에 딜레테네 아니 바기 예외 루트에 아니 개와 주제발에 때네 개와 디 도초 개와 주디 아니 예매 제발에 때네 아니 미 루트에 타이 루트에 단남샤디 다야 남주다 자고 다 참여 자대요 로다디.
And then with respect to the 10 non-virtues, that from the non-virtues, as a result of the 10 non-virtues, one is then reborn with the body of a hell being, one is born with the body of a preta, or a hungry beast body, and one is reborn with the body of an animal. So that serves as the cause. The practice of the 10 non-virtues leads to death. Those three kinds of body, whereas then the practice of the 10 virtues, or engaging in the 10 virtues, leads to a human body and leads to a celestial body. So this is renowned usually, this is widely known. So first that has to be known nonetheless, and then the explanation can follow.
타바 dünyayı lögi simbi tone ani migi chubungu chudumdi de labi ondizane dilatene no kuyu lü ma rubache ani taba top chane yilu se chubeyor oda yilu de chubi chu chadoyeji.
So when we talk about the ethics or the morality of eliminating the 10 non-virtues, if that is conjoined with the mind of liberation, in other words, the mind that wishes to be liberated, then the mind that then not only does it become the cause for overcoming samsara, it also becomes the cause for generating what is called a mental body. So then, when this morality of eliminating any of the 10 non-virtues, when that kind of ethical behavior is conjoined with bodhicitta, then that becomes the cause for a Buddha's body.
Hadami Lutubering, son the Poma Zambres, Nanjosha, Kusinji, Chebercheni, Sanji Bumejina, Sanji in the Simjin Tunji Bumejina, Kusu Gorva, Kusu Sobaji, the young woman in a Zawata Mikijubum Sim Charudo. Ready, disinjed the Chanju Simporva.
So then when we talk about here the 10 non-virtues, the ethics of eliminating the 10 non-virtues, that kind of ethical behavior in itself doesn't just lead to the body of a celestial being and so forth, but independent on what it is conjoined with, it can also lead to a Buddha's body. So here it leads to, in general we can say it leads to a celestial body and human body, but in conjoinment with, depending on what it is conjoined with, if it is conjoined with bodhicitta, it can also become the cause of the body of the Buddha.
sabami belesiedi nijungi sembe kunela mimiki chubum sudim pagi sungal tene sabi ledi mendro samba chiware jodang tu stawaina ine pejena la tinjing munzi cheba chemaso ku nijun sembe simbi miki chubum sudim chiwaro ilu limbi kyula sabami belesiedi shewaro
So when we talk about the cause for the mental body, we talk about here a factor of the imprints as the cause for such a mental body. We talk about the factor of the imprints of ignorance as well as the uncontaminated activity. So those are the two causes, uncontaminated activity or the uncontaminated karma. So here, those are the two causes for a mental body, and when we talk about the uncontaminated activity here, that is, and this is usually not explained in the scriptures, but Geshe-la is saying this is what we need to posit here as the uncontaminated activity. That would be the mind of renunciation conjoined with the ethical behavior that refrains from the 10 non-virtues.
다 자외 구투베 주디다 미기 주봉 수림체 다 낭세기다 켜버려로 구이 켜버려네 치료기다 베나산지기다 다비신강기 내주기 주 내기 구바리 되게 주베도 다 침배터는 연구해야지. 침바.
So with regard to the main cause of the kind of, in general, the cause of a Buddha's body, that would be the kind of morality that refrains from the 10 non-virtues. But then with regard to all the kind of details of like a Buddha's body, so not just talking about the actual physical body, but talking about like the different pure realms, the different varieties of different pure realms. So the establishment of those pure realms, they depend on the practice of generosity, dependent on the practice of generosity that they are established, they come into it.
지사 디 라제 샤당디 갈라고레다 지라브르 제네라브르 제데 테버체 스톱디가 디르다 가시고레 베친치 라나 다 차상다베 뒤지우마로 지라나 베나 산제라야 외지요레 왜 파게 따지다는 뭐 보이지르데 도는 로로 외숨주선이 시르 외직입니다. 외직이 내가 가지고 그랬으나 외디 최비 gen지네 파조들 술을 퍼봐 있는 포서들 내놔서 시주해 어떤지기 외지요래. 제선다 외디 산지 권한의 외디 딘디지 용해지 딘디기 외디 퍼비 gen지 파조기 내놔서 시얘기 외디 가르치는 용어를 했으나 아니 뭐 전주선배님이 가라. 아니 심진기 심진의 멘제 심진기다 갈라오다 나서 자에게 치도 배진체 딘디기 제비 주디 있는 산지비 주로 디왕기 있는 산지도 외도 주바레스 어떤지 송요.
So when we talk about as an example for how these activities, like certain activities, give rise to a certain result in the continuum of the Buddha here. So for example, giving one example, there's so many, but just one, we can't give all of those here. So when we talk about the Buddha, there's a description that there's different rays of light that emanate forth from a Buddha's body. There are actually said to be 32 different types of kind of light, of kind of light that radiates out from the Buddha's body. And one type of those lights, one type of those rays that comes forth from the Buddha's body, which radiates out, is said to have the property that when it hits a person's body, when it kind of touches when these rays of light touch another person's body, they're able to cure this person from any kind of illness or disease. So why is that? Why does it have such a property, this particular one of those 32 different types of light or rays? So what is the kind of, what's the reason for that is, and the reason that is given in the scriptures is that when the Buddha, before he became a Buddha, when he was a Bodhisattva, he worked for the benefit of sentient beings, like when they were sick, for example, he provided them with the medication that they needed, they provided them with treatment, and he dedicated those activities towards his state of enlightenment, and so therefore this is the property of the light that type of light that radiates out from his body.
ane kora kenser nache ane kenser menju chebi kabla chilugi menju ma cheba che tamasi shina lago meto da kaje menju chebi kabla 산지 멜라도 소하다 멜라기 생하다 디치 유디자네 아니 차지 수부치디 디자네 추모볼리 된지 잡아다 야 추모볼리가 주는 명에 된지 모볼리야 잡아된다 야 차지 미니 파수 두스 대제 지 달라 루제나 신직 제제서 디제디 파저 미디네 주 외모부지네 천사 가리 나선데 미디 두스치디 잡로디라 산지 멜라 구버도시다 간제 딘디긴 제니 민지에 제요래 아니 나서 자제 다 바로 선임mel에게 지도 주송선 이치지고 다들 왜 니네 통선들이 같이 균이 이치지고 말을 과도 대체로 투그레스 이치지고 말 이내 과랑디 선임님을 최종과 최 오르가닉이 최 이종고 디지디 아니 용해지래네 아니 용해하자지래 아니 뭐심바차 아니 기지래 코케서 나게 되다 과랑이 맞네 되는 자손라니 아니 그게야 디나시 선임mel의 제가 되지디 바라지라니 선임이 카레 내가 내다 두자두스직 라니 아니 디 멜레체마 장지 디지네 아니 외지 레니야 외지포 디네 수부 대상상샤 메마르드디 나지 다 딩외라이나 벌써 키문 테라비사 직제보도 라인사로 슐라 저디잖아 디 제보고 메두스 라 아시네 아자직디 다가라고 말았었어 시 그디 키도 줄이라 되고라 또 거는 신직라로 야신다 그 가디 간지 다디 딘디 루지직이 토네 레다 두고 말디 이네 도나는 소야다 루지딘디 온데 전에 인시버지 그 차이도
So it's difficult actually, depending on the kind of stories, to generate faith on that, to really generate belief on that. But Hitler was telling the story of a man, of a person who had cancer, and that could really be done. So what he did was he depended on medicine Buddha. So he did the practice of medicine, of the medicine Buddha, beside the mantra and so forth, the practice of medicine Buddha. And at some point, when he was having a shower, while he was having a shower, there was blue water coming forth. So blue water emanates a blessing from medicine Buddha. And on another occasion, when there was no water at all, nonetheless there was like this appearance of blue water. And in another case, he was exercising with a person, and the person he was exercising with was facing this man. And as the other person was facing him, blue rays of light were coming from that person. And so he was wondering, what's going on? What is happening? And then the other person kind of stepped to the side, and there was a picture of the medicine Buddha right behind that person. So those are the rays of light that he received. So definitely this person had faith in medicine in that kind of practice. And so this was something that became beneficial for this person. And apparently this man who had benefited from that, he was selling organic vegetables. He was a person who was selling organic vegetables, and one of his customers, a lady who was also quite sick, who suffered from an incurable kind of disease, she was told about this, and she herself started now doing this practice. So she herself did the practice of medicine Buddha, and as a result of that, she felt really well. There was like a total sense of wellness, a sense of being okay. And when she went to the hospital, previously they told her she had to get treatment for chemotherapy, but that was no longer possible. So therefore, these are like stories that we hear, where it's kind of like a story, but where a person has received a special benefit by doing the mantra, by doing the medicine puja practice, and being benefited by this and being possibly cured or getting better because of that.
他说现在终于有一个人站在我这边，有人证明我说的是真的，不然之前我说的大多是我乱说，都是我是因为我的那个我的内心错乱的缘故，我才这样说。现在终于有人证明我说的是真的。虽然刚才讲的这段故事呢，我们不能够以一个历史故事或者一个故事来说，这个故事一定是真的。可是如果把这个故事里面所说的这个内涵跟经典映照的话，的确是有可以映照之处。
当我们做的。 吕以切不了要过用的的，本就龙就用的的，第几切不了用的，每个的搞不切的，老说别的，切不来个切，第几的，全部去种水吧，第这个头呢用个有不的，那就用它切掉了，第几的，全部去种水吧，第几的把公培都当， 단 남중기 제대 딜레베디 다 격육 동교기 다 야가다 뿌다가다 자체와다 딘지 제바이나 디 제고디 간지 연구에서나 남주 유대기 류다 농주다 되게 격육 동교 분주 야가지 용해 임바디 기시 군제이나 다다 리고르다 지사 디인디 엔디기 톤데다 가스고레다 당고 알랭이를 교마시들 렌제 디 조사와지도 고구도 디면 시고랍니다 지사다 진보 수준 수버딜레 때네다 그게 류다 농주 딘지 연구에나 딩원수 류율의 대비 진보 수준 수변이 렌지 제바이나 디 제고디 간지 연구에서나 원수 류율의 대비다 구편선 소바다 농주 편선 소바다 딘지 용해 임바디 그 군제기 톤에 최고치도 거로 디기 톤에 다 수부주탄데 디레 다시 샤나치 딘지 시초사를
So with regard to therefore the difference, the physical kind of differences that we have, so the way we are different from one another physically, the different measure of possessions that we possess, so the degree of friendship that people like and have not like, and so forth. So all that is a result of engaging in generosity, ethical behavior, patience, and so forth. So different degrees of those practices result in different characteristics physically and so forth. So therefore, if we increase the practice of generosity, we increase it manifold, we increase this practice, we make it stronger, then we have even greater results. So 100,000 times stronger results will come forth. So thus, everything, all the practices, when we engage in an enhanced way, when we engage in generosity, ethical behavior, forbearance, and so forth, patience, and so forth, then the results are multiplied. The greater we engage in these practices, the more fruitful they are, the more the results are multiplied, the greater the results will be. Now, this understanding, of course, is based on an understanding of past and future life and the law of karma. So here, with regard to past and future lives, so we've accumulated different causes and conditions which then give rise to the different physical appearances, different degrees of wealth, different degrees of friendship, and so forth. So then, if that is true, then even going beyond, like even something that goes beyond our mental ability to actually understand, it goes beyond our ordinary mental ability to actually understand this, and is able to generate a Buddha's body, a Buddha's kaya, independent from that. So the enjoyment and so forth, the enjoyment of the Buddha, the actual Buddha's body, and so forth. So these are like incredible causes that go beyond our mental capacity to actually comprehend at this point. So it's possible, therefore, to achieve through the appropriate causes and conditions such an amazing result that is found in the continuum of the Buddha. And this is based very much on the law of karma and so forth.
다 렌제이 거르시에 되나 다 뒤지 단계 말에 대비 신식 나와이나 잠보 커뮤니티에 아니 이미 시스템 예제로도 다고 최대진의 통내 디레마도 다 저다 졸루다 되게 쉬우지기 가버렸다. 같이 두고도 다 레비처리 예줘야지 수비기로 하시. 다 디나신진에 다 수비기 하게 레비처리 다 그거한테 다 하게 진보 수준 서버티즈 더 줘야지. 순거로.
So, of course, to go into all the details with regard to the law of karma, that will not be possible, but to just give an example here, when one meditates on love, for example, it is said that the immune system increases, that one's immune system gets better, that one's immune system gets stronger. So, of course, it is difficult to totally establish how that is the case, how this meditation on love then leads to that, but nonetheless, it can be measured. One can measure the enhancement or strengthening of one's immune system. So therefore, in that way, the kind of positive kind of activities, mental and so forth, by way of them increasing, then there are positive kind of results that one can experience. So this is true here, in particular, when we talk about the practice of generosity, ethics, and patience, and so forth. So, but now we've only spoken of practicing generosity, ethical conduct, and ethics and patience, but we haven't spoken about love and compassion. So how does this work from the point of view of love and compassion?
딜레도 전에 지선 진바당의 번져 연구를 세야지 아니 파제 아니 번져 연구를 대점로 고하려는 지겨 말 마디에 가르스나 총안한 대등도 딱 말하시 잘라제디고 제마찬 대등도 도심 이내 번져 놓지 요요 말 기와서 이남이 기와사에 요 말들
So, but saying with regard to generosity, that by practicing generosity when we receive possessions, well here generosity doesn't refer to just giving to other people, because those who work in a store, all day long they give products to other people. But even though they give products, they give away things every day, it doesn't mean that they're actually receiving certain possessions as a common result of that action.
其实他情报当晚的那龙居用过的是情报写的，他动一心的了的呢，龙居用过的给这的写个，其实动一心的结巴呢，我是怕给马这巴因呢，龙居用来给的这部的主图过，其实顶顶的呢，怕给程序心把本身名的顶顶呢，呢米不钱的动心钱说了，有些呢那时候光的心钱都是这米不钱的，你前面把钱的作业送过，看起动心的电脑用过，都写的。
So, how is it then true that through the practice of generosity one receives certain possessions or material wealth? Well, the reason is that actually generosity refers to an awareness, to a type of mind that is giving, that is in the nature of giving or has that giving kind of property. So then, even if one just generates such an awareness of wanting to give, without physically actually giving, the result of gaining possessions and material goods and so forth will still be there. So therefore it is really this mental attitude that is most important, which is also illustrated by the fact that when bodhisattvas, for example, who have no possessions to give away, what they do is they visualize all sorts of possessions and then visualize giving them to sentient beings. So therefore they still experience the result of such generosity. And so in short, Geshe-la is saying it is really that mind that wants to give which we describe as generosity.
지금 뒤인도 준비 벌진 없는 소라도 아니 배샤들이 때는 장가지 지지에 붐때는 준비 벌진 소래. 다 단도 저요만 동굴 때는 준비 벌진 소래. 장가지 지고 말. 야나면은 로직 진바당 로니 진바당 아니 로지 사지 아니 신의 로딘지로나 준비 벌진 소 텐티 말에. 준비 벌진 소스도 동의 생기 니버디 용수 소스는 아니 준비 벌진 소스. 기지디가 리고가 디춘중나 세부송.
So when we talk about completing the perfection of wisdom, so reaching and the perfection of perfection of giving, so the perfection of generosity. In other words, completing this practice of the perfection of generosity. That does not mean if you give. It does not depend on how much you give. So let's say you give $100 or $100,000 or $1 billion, and that's when the perfection of wisdom is now complete. Or you practice for 1 year and then 2 years and so forth, so there's a certain amount of years that you have to practice. That is also not what we mean when we say complete this practice of the perfection of wisdom. Here, the perfection of generosity. So what it means really is here to complete or to perfect the mind of giving, the mind that wants to give. That's when we talk about completing the practice of the perfection of generosity.
디기 고아디 라마라기 토네 케버시타요. 디 고아디 마랑이 디기 삼르는 어로라 카리어레스나 동이 심케디 규제. 무시 지면이 없는 시디 제디 무시 제 심진의 제디 무시 다 냠네디체. 이네 제발라 동이 심지 깨버려. 진짜 동이 심디디 야나도 삼르고가. 디 고아라 상해지기 동이 심디 무시제. 제디 다 야나레. 그래서는 지단의 동이 심 직계 차서는 랑링한 게 제기를 지단에 초진에 강중에 동심이 이렇게 줘야 된다는 치도님의 제거다. 마제지냐 되네 유기를 마제지냐 되네 동심 이렇게 줘야 말아. 저 동심 이렇게 다에 소지 디기 치도 아니 제리 디치고. 그래서 대스 켜드려 거 문제입니다.
So when we talk about here to understand this, so what this kind of mind that wants to give, what that refers to, so understanding this or not, well, usually we talk about the mind that wishes to give as the cause for the giving, and then the actual giving, we say the activity of giving, that is the main kind of activity here. But this is actually, we change it around, this is actually the other way around, where the mind of wanting the mind that wishes to give, that is the main generosity. And secondary to that is the actual giving. Because, I mean, without that awareness that wants to give, without that mind that wants to give, one is first of all unable to give anyway. So one wouldn't give without actually that awareness. It's kind of like it just naturally arises from that wish to give. So therefore, it's kind of the secondary to the mind that wants to give, in the sense that one doesn't give without having such a wish to give, and then the wish to give, therefore, is the main kind of awareness that is even present when, not only before the giving, but also at the time of giving. So this means that the mind that wishes to give, that is the main factor. This is the principal factor of generosity, and the actual physical giving. Giving is just
应该是舍心才是正心，给这个动作它就只是几分。
디제디자네 아니 미고모 아니 분타모 요딩이지 고모 치카시지 침바탕나 아니 미 베샤춘이 메딩에다 고모 갸마데 메딩이지 고모 갸데 침바탕샤나 다 베샤제는 지기 치당데 지기 갸당데데 지미 버진냐면 갸당이 휴치워 줘요 동생 휴치워 깨워로 되더라.
So therefore, that also explains why when you have a person who has millions of dollars, for example, if they give like $10,000, as opposed to a person who has very little money and they give $100, so actually from the point of view of the amount of money here, the $10,000 are greater in terms of the amount, in terms of the value, than the $100. But nonetheless, in this case here, because the wish to give is stronger in the continuum of the person who has less, so therefore, since that is stronger, there's actually a greater kind of generosity has taken place in the case of the person who's given lesser money.
다 간들 집에 조세에 동에선 취디나신다 취딩 조세에 시베강 수리에 뭐도 자와가는 말에 수비님의 조세에 다 시베강 수시우와 다 디시에 거디잖아요. 다 신이 아니 신이 되게 무시기제도 시우 침바스나 가래 되게 심신 성신기 침바스이다 반조롱제도 소바 신의 제기 삼바래 디잡바래 잡바 닌지 정주심을 이루어 정주dimba 잡비셈 잡비 미바니스 가사 나는 심나 요래 대비 유체 남바 나초바 이르체는 심진 남나 대떠바고스 다 대원 남바 나초 이르체 디심진들 중로체나 심진들 디템버 주지 어디 다 잡아군다 샤고로 제가 선생이 진버스는 잡아 차기도 다 미치비 진버스는 다 심진내 나자를 강에 테들이 잡베레 디닝지기 셈레 셈도 주차려온디 다 최기 진바에 다 디는 차로로 디레도 진바다네 점리 정신 차로도 다 주dim라나 돈비 주dim스는 심진다 다 채와 시다 제벌 도메레 심진 채와 도메 닝지기 디차로도 다 디나 신지기 아니 심진 거래다 심지 든지 수름스다 심지의 편도 주변에다 심지 동의세 인디 전닝지리 다 개와치도 수름스도 다 심진 유튼도다 다들 소설의 윤대면은 심지로 제도 말하다 다 심진 디제치도 아니 윤대디기디 디 자기 가리가리 고구여버도 주변에 세미 되잖아요 디 잠주든 버디 디차로 수름 디차로도 어다 딘데딘데 제우도 제상 아니 라상의 쉬비 도나로라 아니 진비초 잠주기 세미 닝지기초 가사 수진비초 장주기 세미스 세베초 장주기 세미스 어디 소요 제사 디제디 아니 파게 진보 수진 세베톤의 라제샤에 디기 장주생기 라제샤바나 따다 추로 두스나나
So from the point of view of completing generosity, so therefore it goes down to the practice, for completing the practice of generosity, it goes back to the awareness, it goes back to the mind, it goes back to completing or perfecting here the mind that wants to give. Likewise, when we talk about perfecting the practice of ethics or the practice of patience, again, it goes down to the mind, kind of bringing that mind to completion, bringing that mind to perfection. So it goes back to those awarenesses and not to any kind of external phenomena. But now to take it to the actual point, how this relates to the practice of love and compassion. So how does this relate to the practice of compassion and so forth? Well, in the sense that there are the different types of generosity. So, for example, the giving of material objects. So the giving of material objects, it is described as a practice of love in the sense that one visualizes all sorts of beneficial kind of objects, anything that provides sentient beings with pleasure and so forth, and then one gives those phenomena to other beings. So that is the giving of material things, which is subsumed under or pertains to the practice of love. And then the second type of giving, the second type of generosity, refers to the giving of fearlessness or the giving of protection, which refers to the practice of compassion, of like avoiding any types of problems, protecting sentient beings from any types of problems. And then the giving, the third type of generosity, or the third type of giving, refers to the giving of the Dharma, which here is both giving love and compassion, or pertains to both love and compassion, those two. And then further, if you look at the practice of ethical conduct or morality, here the refraining from negative actions or the refraining from non-virtuous deeds or activities, the first type of morality, again that refers to the practice of compassion, because one refrains from harming others, so one protects others from suffering in that way, and therefore the first type of ethical conduct or morality refers to the practice of compassion. And then to work for the benefit of others, to work for to benefit others, work for the benefit of others, this type of ethical conduct, so the ethical conduct of working for others' benefit, that refers again to the practice of love, again benefiting other sentient beings. And then the third type of ethical conduct, of engaging in virtuous activities, that refers to again both love and compassion, and in particular then here generating the wish to become enlightened, in other words the aspiration, the enlightenment aspiration. So from that perspective, we can say that these different practices, and so likewise also, of course, forbearance or patience, it all refers back to, or it all pertains to the different practices of love and compassion. And so in the Sutra of the Request of Haksam, so in this sutra, he also says that these practices of generosity, or it is also said that these practices of generosity, ethical conduct, and patience, as of like the practices of these perfections, they are part of the, they go into the direction of the practice of bodhicitta, or they go into the direction of bodhicitta.
다 디게디 제산 디게디 슈치로 치로 같이 저희 저기 아니 위다 농제다 디게디가 표서 서로 줘야지. 이제 다 오늘 슈치로 간지 두고래서나 다 디게 숍제도 아주 신기해. 맨날 자이나 잘 제와 허리 끼고만 다 장바이나 때에서 다 공도 제와 매번 마세다 콜 두자용나 가에 콜 야보마 용나 가에 다 때에서 너 장도 다 딘디 매버지 그 가게 콜 두자주 때에서 야기 되는데 다들 두자주나 아카아세지 이네 콜다 빈자나 신도 조고나 신진이 요구마로 왔다 되네 야기를 줘지 아니 타르 아니 수수이 파마나 신야나 수수 두고나 신 제와지 계수나 다 제와다 타두세오르다 던지지보도 다 이렇게 줘요 여보다 어서 하고 거다
So how do these get stronger? So by way of getting stronger, so that therefore then all the resultant states, so one's enjoyment, one's body and so forth, they're also enhanced. So the more these states, these kind of practices, these kinds of awarenesses are strengthened, the greater the result, as in like physical enjoyment, physical results, enjoyment, and so forth. They also increase accordingly. So how do they get greater? How can they be enhanced? enhance? Well, this we can understand roughly on the example of, for example, a person we dislike, an enemy. So initially, when there's an enemy, someone we dislike, we will leave aside having love and compassion towards them or a kind of caring attitude towards them. When something, leaving that aside, when something bad happens to them, we may rejoice. So initially, there's this kind of rejoicing in whatever negative things that happen to them, but then slowly we can transform that attitude towards them. That when something happens to them, we think, akara, or how terrible this happens to them. So that thought may arise. So nonetheless, we don't care for them in the same way as we would care for a friend or a relative when they suffer. But then slowly, one increases that state of more and more, and then this person who used to be our enemy, then when something negative happens to them, well, we care for them, not just when that happens to them in general, we care for them in the same way we would care for a friend, we would care for our own parents. So we can see from that example that it's possible to enhance these states of love and compassion that can be enhanced. So this is something we can know from our own personal experience.
제가 jamninje jamjusim rangi nangi kiesuna 다 밖에 점어만 인버게 시그리다 그러다 대진이나 대진 처럼부터 더버래 그러다 점어만 인버게 봤을 때 진지시리 디버도 때 이렇게 줘야지 어쩌다 밖에 인준이 자대에 되리
So when we talk about here love, compassion, and bodhicitta, so they can actually be enhanced. They can be enhanced to such a degree that they arise naturally. So we generate uncontrite. We can generate these uncontrite states of mind, which then would mark the moment of the path of accumulation. So once one reaches the path of
다 딘디지 계사회 제라 단디 슈치로 치로 조세디 컨데레스 디라와이나 아니 수수기 하모고에 변에 미모 보치려야 수수 제와 유베 제와 치주 찍고 유 젠바 이네 다른 게 넘기게나 다 참아 찍고 유 젠기를 허비가 이네 딩딩라 미라 요르다 리버지 뭐 보여래 제산다 말에 제와 지섬 가시 요르다 아니 찍고 이 젠거래 가시 다연 시중요로 가시 찍다 제와 찍고 유 젠거 뭐 유사임 자리에서 남사 아마 차린 테마 생각도 젠거다 디 거르다 되네 딩딩들다 아마를 제시 채워요다 제가 딘데기 니주 중뒤 엔 신에 하고 해야지 능지 수를 채워도 다가 시다 먹어야지 어딘데요
So then when it has arisen, so when this uncontrite state of mind, love and compassion have arisen, then one has to increase them, one has to make them stronger. Here in general, so we have a sense, there's a difference of how love and compassion arise in our continuum. So when we have lots of people in front of us and there are lots of people we take into mind, there may be a sense, oh, I love those equally in the same way. So there's a sense of like equal love and compassion. But when one digs a little deeper, one can come to see that there's a difference, that there's different types of loving them, some stronger, some less strong, and so forth. One does differentiate, there's a difference of strength with regard to these things. So Vishuddha is saying in my own case, there are certain beings, when I take all of those to mind, there seems to be a sense of like an equal sense of liking them, equally having a sense of caring, a caring attitude towards them in an equal kind of way. But then there's others where there's again a kind of difference. So for example, when the earthquake happened in Nepal, when so many people suffered, my only thought was, oh, my mother, what happened to my mother? So that showed that in that moment, even though so many people suffered in that moment, the most important person for me was my mother, because she was the first person I got concerned about. So therefore, sometimes in general, we're just not aware. There seems to be a sense of like an impartial kind of caring attitude towards many living beings, but we don't really know how we do feel partial towards them and have stronger care for some and less for others.
다 되네 되게 강에 채워 통 야지 다 강에 채워 세월 다지 인도 하고지 강에 채워 이거 되네 돈은 고무 자스티도 동다 망다 다 디스수기 다 저보다 되네 고무 동다 나다 지고 말아 다양 저보래 나세 저보다 비냐 나세도 고무 치치 제투사 봄치 제마투사 봄치 제투사 다 디제마투사 수술 유나 제투사 맨단 수술 기시 제거이나 수술 자면 차도나 디제마투사 다 딘지기 림버트 뭐 여다나 세기 다 디나신 아니 번저당 투사 이내 콜로 요 주거스는 주마투베 아니 요 주투베들에 거기다 거기 치도네 요 교회나 같이 갈레전디나 니만직 대도나 대투베 다와직 되네 나다메 돼 다와직 다다가 대투자 말이래 제투자 말이래 로직 지내 나다메 돼다 딘지기 좀 쉬우지 용사로 진짜 다 디나신지기 아니 갈라올다 거기 치도 아니 수수기 다 게자당 반주당 두술레당 투에 이내 소르레당 투에 그치도 소르레당 투에 이내 다 녀와다 디지 유니지나 녀와도 저는다 켜니 다 맞아고 있나 다 되게 나와네 아마 세와 치셔야되디 다 아메기 치도 녀와도 저거래라나다 제가 유엔에 무무무를 자네 저투자 말아 아메 지금 녀와도 저투자 말아 센티도 저 뭐부터 다 되나 된지진 수치지 뭐부지여디 제사다 탐에 비스면 디기디기 치도 당한 나가 마세거든요. 원래 되는 대 선배기 심 타버지는 게가 있나? 다스 주마자만 타버는 게가 있나? 다 슉슉지로 왔다. 어딘지 좀 뭐 무시부지 여디 아니 주마만 이거 깨차네 권고야지. 제사 딘지 깨지 엔다기라기 다 심진 디기들은 편러지나 아니 배대 나가 마세기보다 왕이 손 대고 주는 나다에 서버지 인대인 서버지 센타셔야 되는지 딘지기 다심 딘지기 채도 저도데 아니 신에 하게 점닝지기다 채 용수 저 디저디 아니 다기라이 아니 동생 벌을도 친 진비 벌을도 친 수링이 벌을도 친 수비 벌을도 친 수리다 상계에서는 민지 벌다
So with regard to beggar, for example, so when we encounter a beggar who behaves kind of rudely, where we don't want to give anything to them, then if the beggar is kind of alright, I mean, doesn't behave rudely but also not nicely, well, maybe I should give him 5 rupees. 10 is too much. So we feel like, no, that's too much. And if there's a beggar who really has greater problems and also is kind of nice and polite, well, maybe I can give him 100, because 1,000, that's too much. So 1,000 I think might be. So then with regard to a friend, okay, so when there's a friend, I may be able to give him 1,000, maybe I was giving 1,000. 10,000? No, 10,000 seems a little too much. But to another person, I can give 10,000, whereas then 100,000 seems too much. So if I give something, if I were to give money and I wouldn't have anything left, again I would think, oh, am I going to give this person all my money even though there's nothing left? So you see there are different, as I was saying, there are different stages of differences in terms of we differentiate what we can give to one person but not to another person. So we're not impartial to which beings, to some we can give more, to some we can give less. And even if we were able to give away all our possessions, but then to actually serve them, to help them, as in like when they're sick, to be with them and look after them. So with some person we feel like, oh, I can do it for 1 week, but 1 month that's too much. And then another person, we can do it for 1 month, but a year, well that's too long. And then with another person we can do an entire year. And then we can take it further from there. So can we give away to a certain person? Can we give away our reputation? Can we give away our possessions? Can we actually give away our own life? So can we give away our own life? And there again differences in what we can give to a person. To some person we can give our reputation but not everything else. And then giving our life, even if we're able to give away our life, would we be able to go to hell for another person. So visualize saying that in my own case, the person I have the greatest love towards is my mom. But even though she were to pass away and she wouldn't be around and she would go to help them and I would cry, I would be upset. But I don't think my love would be enough for me to be able to go to help her. So there's this little difference, therefore, with regard to how far we can go with sentient beings, how far we would go. So that's all these differences here. That means that actually what we're trying to aim for would be that we would be able to go to help all sentient beings without differentiating between any living beings. So sentient beings, as long as space endures, basically, we would be able to go to help for sentient beings, for their benefit, for all limitless sentient beings. So for each of those living beings, we would go to help for their benefit if it needed to be. So until, as long as space endures, we would be able to suffer for sentient beings in such a way. That is the kind of goal we're striving towards. That kind of state of mind we want to attain. So we can come to see that this is very difficult. This is extremely difficult to reach such a state of dedication, such a state of love and care for others. Which means that uncontrived bodhicitta, therefore, once we have generated it, we have to increase it. It has to increase to such a degree that therefore for intersentient beings we're able to benefit them, so that our love and compassion reach some kind of stage of completion. And so likewise here, therefore, the practice of generosity needs to reach some kind of completion. The practice of generosity, of ethical conduct, that mental state, needs to reach some kind of completion. And likewise with patience.
shungnanglo la molamong ki trup se mo yore sanje ji ta yuni chibar khanda ga tu ti molam go wang trup ba se je khashi ki tro ni ni chig di de anda mona ja yin chig di de be wang ki trup se no khade do molam san chig di ma re molam san de ba re mon ba san de ba re she ba ji re je ti de ba je gu wa ma to de ba ma je na chig di ni molam ki chig ri ma to molam ma re ni ro je san ta 대바제라 페나 심진 디기디 동네데 저러 주치 이미 대바제라 대기다바는 장니 깨버리마도 되게 윤대명아 다시 이제 두수 장니 심진 동네데 전도의 글로디 아니 슈칭부지 깨거리마도 디 마장바다 셈네 구조 되게 말아 제가 디 트레이닝하도 제가 딱 만남기 왕기 레시디 다 알링에다 되게 딘디요를 다 산지지 구 통화다 퇴바다 잼바다 세바 셈지에다 파주를 편도 쉽지 용돼야지. 다 타나 아니 되게 내비게와 있네. 진주비 디나 여러 강라 내버지긴 대절와 디비 중내들 접수치스. 되게 정주 셈바도 내비게와 있네 수술 편도 용돼야지. 디 가르치는 데서는 아니 정주 셈바디 뭐는 교환이 말은 내긴 참마 대화 때문에 쉬었으디 되게 자식자 담아만 용네 디 슈디기야 편도 팽이 누버지 리고 알아. 진짜 디 인도에서는 만원 공항에 됐어요. 만원 세야지 장이 정신생들도 수뒤나. 난 세계 변는 인지 난 세계 채나 동해도 나서를 타로쇼. 아니 파게 거기 단 용원에 타로쇼. 거세 맞기고 매버쇼 나세 동해에 남도 타요베디 뭐고 여러 봐. 수 디기 수 dom나 동해 타다던 저 주지 세례 들어왔다. 제가 만원 세는 장이 정주기 셈들. 지금 뭐시 손에 장세도 손은 정주생들 만원 그 초니 셈게 봐오스. 남진은 심지 그도 도시 지거라. 백에다 저어디 뭐놈디 차디거. 어디 인디잖아. 제가 딘디기지 시험인데 딘디기 토네 나제 샤야디 아니 신도 차이 용이나다 대 대화침이 시인나다 사고 겁나다 디기 딘디기 나제 샤나디 샤도 말아.
Therefore, also what we find in the scriptures of the Buddha, there's descriptions of how phenomena have come into existence through the power of prayer. Someone must misunderstand these words, thinking when we say prayers, that means one just has to make prayers, one recites the words, and then one will obtain these results. But actually here, just reciting the words of the prayer, that's not the prayer itself, those are just the words of the prayer. Prayer refers to a kind of wishing attitude, an aspirational, wishing kind of attitude. That's the actual prayer. So for example, wishing for sentient beings to not be separated from happiness, to be free from suffering and so forth. So just kind of saying that will not lead to that kind of strong prayer. So how does one generate such a strong prayer, such a strong wish? By practicing the 6 qualities in one effect practice, or by equalizing and exchanging self for others. This is how one actually trains in making these kind of prayers. So when we talk about a Buddha, like I said that just seeing Buddha's body, just hearing his voice, that is beneficial. And it goes to such a degree that it is said that even harming a bodhisattva can benefit us. In the sense that it's because of the prayers that the Bodhisattvas have made, that even if someone harms me, so whoever harms me, may they get happiness, may they find happiness. So it's because of the power of these prayers that therefore one is able to be even benefited by harming a Bodhisattva. There's some kind of benefit. So therefore when we talk about prayers, in short, prayers refer to the practice of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. So here, the aspiration, if prayer is an aspiration or a wishing type of mind, well, with regard to particularly compassion, it wishes for sentient beings to be free from sickness, from mental unhappiness, from any kind of problem. That is the kind of wishing attitude. So in short, all problems may one be able to eliminate all sentient beings from all kinds of problems and difficulties. So this is the kind of attitude here, which is why it is said that from the direction of prayer, one is able to generate the mind. In other words, it is due to these different prayers and aspirations, one is able to generate the mind and enlightenment. So it mainly comes from prayers. So therefore, you talk about here, when you talk about here the subtle winds and you talk about the great bliss and all these, those in themselves are not the causes, cannot become the causes of the qualities of the Buddha itself. It's rather these types of aspirations, these types of wishing states of mind that lead to the actual causes for the Buddha.
所以我们的祈愿里面当然有可能有各种各样，比如说包括希望病人不要受苦，包括希望病人能够得乐等等这些。可是呢，当我们把一切的苦乐通通收集在并在一起的时候呢，就变成说，愿一切众生都能够离开一切痛苦，获得一切的快乐。那这个呢，就是我们在谈到的慈悲菩提心，它其实就是一种祈愿。那在菩萨地当中呢，也有谈到这样子一段话，他说。祈愿就是菩提心。当然，当年在学到这一段话的时候呢，对这个话有很多的这种辩论跟一些辨析。但简单来讲呢，谈的就是这个，就是我们讲到这种祈愿这种欲愿，他在讲的就是我们现在说的这种菩提心。那透过这个道理呢，我们可以明白说，菩提心它如何成为佛色身的一个印记。那透过像刚才我们讲的这种说明菩提心如何成为佛色身的印记的这个道理，无论你讲的是维系风习，还是你说你在修本尊，还是你在修原始心，都没有办法居正原始光明，你都没有办法说明这之间的关联性是如何清楚达到的。
다 간들이야 잠니지 정주심 공부할 때는 산지의 고방 컨디스 두부리 수구 컨디스 두부리에서 뒤거디 개친구 찌지 아니 배제나로 배제로도 한 제에 신경을 컨디슈에 수수스모 다야래 이번 예부지 속어서라 디마중바이나 아니 백이 딱이 송에게 제 뭐시다 저지 그런 제 송에디 백이 짜치물에서 휴게에 현다지라 잡대기로 왔다 대화네
总之呢，对于